I'd like to introduce our next presenter, Jordan Ryan and Jeannie Regan Dinius, and their presentation, The Monumental Effort to Excavate and Memorialize Greenlawn Cemetery. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having us today. It's been a really great week. I'm Jordan Ryan. I'm the City County Archivist, and I also do the cemetery compliance for the City of Indianapolis.
And I'm Jeannie Regan Dinius. I'm Director of Historic Preservation for Crown Hill Cemetery, third largest private cemetery in the United States, and former SHPO employee who dealt with cemeteries. So, long live the SHPOs.
Here's our outline for today's conversation. We're going to try to keep this brief so we can have some time for discussion. So here's our main question. So our project, and we'll get into the history of Greenlawn Cemetery, but how do we sort of grapple with the city's first public cemetery, which then becomes a very short-lived baseball stadium, then becomes a manufacturing hub, and then it's all erased? How do you deal with those layers of land use and memorialization and centering it on the cemetery and everyone buried there? How do you memorialize everything? Pass it to you to talk about the history.
Yes. So Indianapolis is in 1821. There are people here. One of the first things we need to do is get a place for burials. And so just outside of the city limits, which is today is like right downtown, is the first burial ground called the Old Burial Ground. It's this space over here, the orange. And it was no sexton, which is no person in charge. And so if you had a loved one pass, you just hired a grave digger, and these were not like the cemetery grave diggers, these were just grave diggers who would go and dig a grave and place someone. And then 2 years later, I had a loved one who died, and I hired a grave digger, and they may or may not have known that your loved one was there. And so there's, we'll talk about the archaeology in a bit, but the grave shafts are not nice and neat in a row. It's kind of here, and then there's one across here, and it was a big mess. By the 1830s, this was getting so filled and needed more space that we got the new city cemetery, which is the space here. And then the old city cemetery, the original burying ground, was not cleared. So they didn't clear all the trees out and create this cemetery. Someone talked about it, that they had to go down to the riverbank and come up in order to get to parts of the cemetery because it was trees and scrubs and stuff like that. The new burying ground then got some kind of organization and some kind of surveying, and there were plots which you actually purchased, things like that. But because it was purchased, people were still burying in the old city cemetery because it was free. And the problem was that the sexton in this city cemetery was bribable, and we have two incidences that we know of. So if he did it twice, we're sure he did it. That they did it again of burying people on top of each other. We call it pancaking. So you're getting 2 people in a grave shaft, 5 people in a grave shaft, and so it was just so again, it's a mess. Then we move into some more the new burial ground, which is over here, and then eventually Greenlawn, which today everyone calls it Greenlawn. I call it the Greenlawn Complex because again, it's 4 city cemeteries there from this time period. By the 1880s, they are closing this off for burials, but that doesn't mean they were closed for the mortuary, the funeral home directors were still burying people in the cemetery. Some people were moving their loved ones out to Crown Hill Cemetery. But because we were established in 1863, started accepting burials in 64. So some people were moving their loved ones out there to get away from the meatpacking plants that were along the river. The railroad was starting to purchase land on in the Greenlawn area and creating a roundhouse. And so you have trains going over burials. You've got the disgustingness of pork packing plants. And so families moving loved ones. I'm going to say moving because and part of the problem is that our research before was not in depth. And so we were just talking, well, somebody got moved. Clearly, they moved everything. Well, now that I'm out of Crown Hill Cemetery in our archives, the moves are 3 bones. 3 bones does not make a body. And so then where is everybody else? They were still there. So there were lots of moves over the decades, sometimes for construction, and they would move people out in mass graves. No identification of who it is. So some of these burials are 30, 40 people in an area. Now, Crown Hill, there's a couple of cemeteries here in town. But we don't know who got buried. We don't know who's buried in the cemetery, and then we don't know who actually got moved. And we actually had one incident where we know we moved somebody twice. So in one of the moves in 1911, they took a tombstone and a body, moved it out to Crown Hill. In 1940, there was a building that was on property, and when they were doing some construction work in the basement of the building, they found a Fisk coffin. Fisk is a metal coffin, and it engraved on his name on the coffin, the guy that we moved in 1911. So we moved a tombstone and a body, but they don't go together. So this guy's actually got 2 burial sites now on Crown Hill.
We got the wrong guy.
We got the wrong guy, yeah. So we don't know who we moved. And then now there's a question that we're gonna, do we remove his tombstone out of Crown Hill? So then the city decides they're gonna make part of it into a park, because why not? Other parts, the baseball stadium was built on the property. Then it became industrial, and Diamond Chain Company, which made car parts and bike parts, things like that, was built on the property. And again, there were moves. There was moves in the 1930s. We had a Confederate prisoner of war camp in Indianapolis, and in the 1930s, they moved 1,700 graves from out there. I know where the space is at Crown Hill. That's not 1,700 bodies. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, is incomplete moves and a history of a variety of different things happening on the property.
So now we'll go through sort of a detailed visual analysis. So getting back to the beginning, or do you want to do this part? Oh, okay. So this is the 1821 map from the State Library that I'm obsessed with. So this shows you sort of off to the edge of the mile square. There's a square that says graveyard. That's a 4-acre note. Let's see if my animation works. Yes. So you can kind of see where we're sort of in a pastoral setting. We're outside of the downtown, the city. We're along White River. What a beautiful place to start our first public city cemetery. So here we're looking at 1852 and 1866, and you can see that growth we were showing you in the previous slides, where now we have the old or original burying ground, also the new, and then the new or PEX. And then by 1866, you have that really full footprint of about 25 acres with the addition of the Greenlawn Cemetery. But what do you notice by 1866? You see the city has really kind of grown around the cemetery. You see the rail to the north, coal yards. So you're seeing the beginning of industry kind of encroaching upon the cemetery. And I essentially, when I talk about White River and industrialization and land use, I try to get people to think like this was just a giant garbage disposal for manufacturing and industry. So of course it's sort of natural that they're going to start encroaching upon the area. So it's really losing that beautiful pastoral feel. And then here you can see it in 1870, 1875. So by 1875, we have that rail roundhouse that Jeannie was mentioning. And then by 1901 and 1908, we have removed part of that footprint of the cemetery for more rail, more industry. And 1908, you see the park notation from the Parks Department, turning it into a very short-lived park. And then by 1916 and 1937, can you point to the yellow, to the baseball?
This is the baseball. No, that's the baseball.
Yeah.
That's the baseball.
Yeah, so those were the grandstands of the baseball stadium. That was also very short-lived on the grounds. And then you can see to the north, Diamond Realty, that's for the Diamond Chain Company. So they've purchased that parcel. And then you can still see sort of that square in Greenlawn Park where the original 4 acres of the first 1821 section is.
The Diamond Chains where we found the Fisk coffin in the 40s. So
Yeah. And then the 1937 historic aerial shows you that first iteration of the diamond chain factory. And then to the south, you have more of a transportation hub. So again, sort of overlaying that 1937 aerial with that original kind of footprint of the four cemeteries, just to give you a sense of that chronology in the space, because I know this is really complicated. So we're dealing with about 25 acres, but with the city in our project with the bridge, we only have 1.5 acres. So we are only dealing with the roadway, which goes through the original burying ground and the new burying ground. We don't own the rest of it. And since we're recording, I'm going to behave, but we can always talk after this. I'm going to be nice.
I don't work for the state anymore. I don't have to be.
Jeannie can say whatever. So circling back to today, you can see that Henry Street right away, that is the road. So doing cemetery compliance, I can't make people above me move bridges and roads, but I can make damn certain that we follow state law and we're compliant and we remove everyone that we find and parts of everyone. So that's what I can do in my job, in my capacity. So here's a little bit about the bridge. So the bridge is being constructed to connect the former GM stamping plant, which is now the new Elanco headquarters, to the city proper. So they're building this bridge with 4 rings that are programmed with lights. There will be public art, interpretive panels, and you can see 60% of the bridge is dedicated to pedestrian. So, you know, cyclists, wheelchairs, strollers, and only 40% is dedicated to motorists. Anything you want to add?
And so, so part of the interpretation, it gives this, because there's so many people walking on the bridge, it gives us the opportunity, can we do panels? Can we interpret that? And how much, and what do we interpret? So today, we already said we have about 1.4 acres, 1.5 acres of the former 25-acre cemetery. So we're constantly in consultation with the SHPO, both for Section 106 and 1421 compliance with state code. We did establish a community advisory group back in May of 2023. So this is a group of historians, genealogists, city advocates. We really sort of assembled like a dream team of superheroes that we each sort of just take part of the workflow and we're all researching and contributing, and it's a really wonderful group. We do offer public information meetings annually on the progress of the project. I tell people we are about 2 years through a 7-year marriage. So the planning and the initial excavation, that's how far we've gotten thus far. We still have to finish the excavation. There are years of analysis, both with the human remains, so doing that osteological work, but also all of the research with trying to reconnect people to their names, to their headstones. There's a great deal of research with the artifacts, both things found outside of coffins, but also the funerary burial artifacts, and then all of the reporting that has to be done per state compliance. So I think we're still about 5 years out before we can really get into sort of the memorialization, because what are we memorializing if we don't know? You know, so there's still a lot of work to do. So I just want to preface with that. We do have a project website you're welcome to check out. It's that very complicated string of letters, WRIDinfrastructure.com. So we do provide weekly grave shaft counts. So don't be scandalized when Eunice asked me what our number was yesterday. We want to be transparent and we want to go above state compliance. We also have an artifact gallery. So select artifacts that have been excavated. You can get a sense of the material culture we're working with. And the research that was done prior to this was very, very light. And so we had ideas and we had thoughts about what was going to happen there, and we have found that they are not all wrong, but a lot wrong. We made assumptions through basically newspaper articles, and we all know how accurate newspaper articles can be. And the archaeology now is proving some of this wrong, and that is why we also don't want to do any interpretation yet, but we're also fighting with people who are telling us, but this, and we're like, but that's not correct anymore. We can prove it because it changes. It's iterative, and that's causing, I think, some problems with the community, because they heard 4 years ago this, and we're like, well, that still is right, but it's actually this now. So
Yeah, we have every obstacle and
Yes.
nuance and complication with this project. This is showing you the status of the excavation. So green is what has been fully excavated. Yellow is where they're currently working. And that's part of the members of the community advisory group. And then just to give you a taste of our website, that's what the artifact gallery and the grave shaft count looks like. We're up to 745, so I haven't updated the table.
go back one for a second.
Yeah,
That's all they excavated, and we're at 741.
745, I think.
45
Yeah.
shafts. And the shaft does not mean bodies, because a shaft can have multiple, could have nobody in it, because it could have been moved. It could have parts of someone, because they didn't move them all, or it could have multiple, because we know that the sexton was bribable. So
Yeah. So a little bit about our communication. We have an internal team. So this is members of DPW, our Public Works Department, the Mayor's Office, me in the City County Archives. I'm actually in the Office of Finance and Management. So we're working together constantly with our consultants. So that is our principal investigators running the excavation, running the lab analysis with the human remains, with the artifacts, and then working with our community advisory group. And then we are all working together to communicate with the public and with the SHPO. Do you want to
I will talk about this. So, okay, we had a POW camp in Indianapolis. If you know Indianapolis, the McDonald's at 16th and Meridian, it's just behind, back in that area. So when they died, they were moved down into the cemetery. They were moved once within the cemetery because the railroad wanted the property where they were, so they were moved once. And then in 1911, the federal government required some memorialization, and this monument was put up for the Confederate soldiers at their new place within the cemetery. And then in the 1930s, the soldiers were all moved to Crown Hill. The monument was moved to Garfield Park. Don't know why. And this has caused a problem because the memorial says, "Here lies these bodies," and so people were like, like, 10 years ago, oh my God, there's burials at Garfield Park. It's like, no, this is old, got moved in, and then the city took it down with all of the movement of the Black Lives Matter movement of taking down monuments and stuff to the Confederacy. They took this down and it is now in storage. I don't know why it didn't come with the soldiers to Crown Hill. It would actually make more sense, but it did not. But this is the only piece that's ever really, the rest of the cemetery had very limited tombstones that any visual that way.
So thinking of the memorialization today, I want to give a shout out to Ahmad, who did an amazing design charrette, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, kind of envisioning what a potential monument space could look like if we had more property, beyond the road. So this is sort of breaking down where we're coming from. We have a cemetery that has essentially an anthology of pioneer stories. These are both black and white pioneers, rich and poor, young and old. There are a lot of infants and children. So how do you kind of tell a story of Indianapolis from the 1820s to the 1860s? There's really rich history there if we can just get into the archives and kind of figure that out. But this is also a story about land use and changing values of land and industrialization. This is also a story of stigmatized land and civic shame and how we think about governments and making choices or the lack of making a choice and how we live with those legacies today. So the CAG is studying monuments related to cemeteries and burial grounds in other cities. We've been looking at New York City. Leon Bates, one of the CAG members, and myself spent a week out in Tulsa to study all of their forms of memorialization. So we're really trying to gather sort of the talking points and the implementation and the methods before we get started and kind of get dirty in the sandbox, right? So here are some of the issues we're dealing with. It's a 204-year history. Are we celebrating? Are we teaching? Are we remembering? How do we do all of the things with our limited capacity, with our limited funding? How are we strategic about what we decide to invest our time and money in? Who gets to decide? There's a lot of, like Jeannie said, nuanced research that needs some teasing out before we start making these interpretive takes. How do you memorialize a cemetery that's been decentralized when you have mass relocations to other cemeteries? What does that look like physically? Do we do it digitally? What is a digital monument? What does that look like? I see some heads nodding in the back. So we're really here to kind of throw all these questions at you as academics and practitioners to kind of help us center that discussion as we move forward.
And I think also with digital, I think today is a great example of, but if we do it a website and it's government-based and the government's priorities change. I was just in a meeting yesterday about Underground Railroad sites and the National Park Service potentially changing websites about that. So what if we put this all up and the next administration says, we're not going to be embarrassed by this and we're taking it down? So then what do we do? So I think that at first I was all like, all digital, we need to do it. And now it's like, maybe not all digital. So.
Yeah, the sustainability of digital apps and platforms, and watching a great project go online and then within 3 years link rot or someone's not paying the maintenance bill. But back to sort of Ahmad Charette and his concept, like how do you memorialize when you don't own land outside of your right of way? Right now, who knows what will happen tomorrow or next month or next year, but we're just in a very it's a very tense situation right now with the private developer to the north. So I don't know how that's all going to pan out. So here I've kind of listed some ideas or topics for storytelling and kind of building that narrative, thinking about individuals that we can show through documentation were buried there. We do have the plots for 3 of the 4 cemeteries, so we can get some family names. There are headstones that we're finding buried below grade, so we can maybe reconnect some individuals based on that information. I would love to do story maps that show the decentralization of the cemetery to other cemeteries over time with all that free time I have. Anything else you want to add with issues?
Well, and for me, an issue is if we were to get other land in the cemetery or within the property, other parcels, then we would be moving bodies to memorialize that we moved bodies, because you can't build a memorial on top of, per state law, you can't build on top of a cemetery. So in order to build any kind of a memorial, we'd have to move bodies, and that to me seems stupid. That's my personal view on moving bodies. So that's also an issue, is that even if we got other parts of other parcels, there are still bodies there, and we're proving through this 1.4 acres how many bodies that we're having. So if we get even just a small little space just off of the road, we could have 200 people we'd have to move, and then you'd move 200 people to memorialize that the city has not treated the cemetery and the people in the cemetery with any dignity. So that's also an issue that I've grappled with. So.
Yeah, so here were the discussion questions, and I know we're running out of time, so if you want to find me later, and I'll share our contact info, but if any, instructors or practitioners in the room wanted to do some sort of teaching charrette with your classes, we're about 5 years out, I think, before we really get into this, so I'm happy to collaborate and learn beside you. So here are some of our discussion questions. How do we create a monument when we don't own, the land outside of the right-of-way? How do you talk about the decentralization of burials over time? Can a network of burial grounds be a monument? What does digital memorialization look like? And how do you acknowledge erasure? And there's our contact info. So you can find me later. Are you going to stick around?
I'll be around for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I think you brought all of the things together in this amazing presentation. I'm also obsessed with this project now, so thank you. And I will come find you because this is I don't have time. I'm thinking of like a suspended or fragmented memorial. That's just going to my mind. But I wanted to ask about descendant communities and the possibility of indigenous remains being in a space where it's not clear who's there, and whether in good faith you're handling remains as if, for example, in Iowa consulting, it's the sort of assumption that a bone actually may not make a body, but it will make a person, right? So like, this is grandmother. It's not her finger, like it is her. So I don't know how you might relate to that question, or if you're even obligated to comply in certain ways, and how you approach that.
Yeah, so we are not receiving any federal funding, but our principal investigator is NAGPRA compliant and has worked on many NAGPRA projects. So we don't have any, pre-contact or indigenous remains as of yet. I kind of expect we will, based on it being on the White River downstream from known settlements of the past. But we do have some pre-contact artifacts, so that also makes me think it is possible. So I have my total faith in him and his team. As far as descendant communities go, we've been doing a lot of genealogical outreach with nearby neighborhoods, and also with the Genealogical Society of Marion County, who are like our cheerleaders, they're workhorses, and so they've been trying to find individuals and families, and we have connected a few descendants to people that are buried there. Some people care, some people don't, and I don't know how, I can't make you care that your great-grandfather is buried there. So it's been really interesting to see the feedback we're getting. So we're just gonna keep compiling the research and making it accessible and hope we can make more connections.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Late in the development of a memorial at the African burial ground, I wasn't always that. We looked at that as a case study of struggling with those same issues.
Yes.
Yes.
And we're not alone in this. So we've been looking at other places of how they're handling it and things like that. And we're also finding all the problems that they had, so that we're hoping not to have the same issues. And I think one of the things I like what we're doing is we're waiting, and we're never going to be done with the research, and we're never going to get it all right, but we're doing the best we can to get as much correct as possible, to give dignity back to the site, to the people who are there.
Thank you.